Welcome. You are at the CCC.
Where there are no outside issues. My name's Anthony. I'm a 7th-year doctoral student in clinical psych, an addict and an alcoholic, another bozo on the bus, and I care about you.
Yes, and I'm LouiLou, and my pronouns are he and him. I am in recovery for crystal meth and alcohol, and I am always in search of balance. Yes, and each week we will provide and create a brave space where we can engage in topics around recovery.
And our intention is to hold and inspire better spaces for more people in recovery by tackling issues sometimes used to separate us.
So before we do that, please like, share, and rate this episode.
Rate this episode, ding that bell.
What else are we waiting for? Oh.
And now the disclaimer. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on At the CCC are ours alone. We do not represent anyone but ourselves. The material and information shared here is for general information purposes only. In other words, we're just a couple of friends behind a mic here to entertain you.
Wonderful.
Why does our sound sound different today?
Maybe it's you.
Maybe it's me.
No, I don't know.
Maybe it's Maybelline. Hi, Louis.
Hi, how's it going?
I'm all right. I feel, I don't know if it's, I feel kind of sleepy, kind of all of that. I think it's the weather.
It's the weather. Definitely.
It is the weather.
It's kind of gray. It's like,
yeah.
We're in this kind of transition before the rain or whatever comes.
Yeah, it's going to rain tomorrow, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, everything's congested right now because of the conference downtown.
Yeah. Because they've rerouted everybody and everything to the other neighborhoods. And so we have new challenges.
We do have new challenges. And what a great way to start today's episode on dealing with daily discomforts.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just looking at you.
No, well.
Oh my God. I was just looking at you.
I'm trying to keep my mouth closed.
Why? What's going on?
No.
Because of what I said the last time, that like when you're
Uh-huh.
talking, normally you keep your
my mouth is always open.
Well, yeah, because you're like ready to say something. So
Am I really?
I don't know. Maybe that's
No, that's not it.
Yeah, it isn't it?
No. It's like,
okay. Well, what have been your daily discomforts for today?
what do you mean?
Well, have you had any daily discomforts today? Like, have you had any discomforts today that you feel like you've had to deal with?
Not really. I mean, today I got up. I had to do some work for the advisory board that I'm on, and then I met with my sponsor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How was that meeting with your sponsor?
It was fine.
All right. So, I've had some discomforts today.
Talk about them.
Okay. Well, so underneath this sweater, what you don't know is I have this shirt underneath it, and because I've gained weight, this shirt has like hiked up. So throughout the day, it's felt like a belly shirt underneath it, which has made me really uncomfortable and like self-conscious. So I've dealt with that today, just like feeling uncomfortable in my clothes. And then I went to work today, and there was, I don't know, it's just, so sometimes like work can be very slow, and it feels like sometimes we're like, it's some of the same issues, or like, I don't know, it can feel a little mundane, like, oh gosh, here we go again. So work can sometimes feel like that. And I had a little bit of that come up today. And and I think just in general, like it's like really kind of gray out. And so, and I feel like probably like next to all of that is like, I woke up this morning and like your thoughts, like my thoughts were kind of like racing. I was like thinking about stuff. And so, I've been, it's just been like a strange day. I think part of that for me is I've been watching a lot of like the coverage on, I was like just watching there was a press briefing at the White House, and they were talking about San Francisco. And that was a little
because of APEC.
Yeah, wow. It was a weird experience because, we live here. And so so we live here, so we see things firsthand, and we have firsthand knowledge of what's actually happening here.
Yeah, and it's frustrating when you hear other people's takes.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, there was like the way the White House was talking about it, and like on Reddit there was ways that people were talking about it, And there was a part of me that was like, I felt very like discouraged because I was like, you know what, like this isn't a political podcast, but I will say this much, that I feel what people have, like the questions people have brought up, and yeah, it's just frustrating to, it often, I guess what's frustrating is that sometimes for me, I want to know that there's like something that's real, like something that's honest and something that's dishonest. And I think these conversations are a lot more nuanced, but you don't get those nuances during these discussions, right? Yeah. Because they get pulled in different directions. So that's been a little frustrating.
You know what? Some of that gives me hope in a weird way, because it's almost like this is the instance where misinformation makes me feel a little better, because like, if I could trust completely all the stuff that I hear, I would be hiding in a cellar somewhere, worried. And I think that, doom and gloom sales, doom and gloom, like, and bad stuff. And I'm like, okay, we know our truths here, and that's all I need to know.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've had to kind of like tap into that, which is like, it's not like I learned something watching these shows or listening to these conversations that I didn't already know. Like, exactly. I already knew that conversations were much more nuanced, and I already knew that, like, sometimes these things get swayed in one direction or another. So
absolutely, especially depending on what you're watching, where you're watching, because it's interesting. You could be watching the same news, like the same kind of press conference, and there's a way that they show it to you from different angles on all the shows, where you get what they want you to get from it.
Yeah, that's what probably it's so kind of. So that reminds me. So one of the things I don't really do is I don't tend to listen to music with lyrics. And if I do listen to music with lyrics, they aren't like evocative lyrics. And the reason why this is because I don't like the idea of having something push me in a direction, like, which is my own stuff, obviously. But like, for example, I don't tend to watch like movies that are dramatic and are like, oh, it's so sad. Like, I don't know that I want to watch a movie and voluntarily make myself sad. But I will watch a horror movie because that's much more tolerable than sadness. I'll give that to some people. Do with that as you will. Get into my psyche.
Mix it up. Stir it around.
I mean,
exactly. All of this ties into like discomfort. It's like, what I'm finding, and I think I mentioned this last week or maybe the week before, or it was just on my mind. I have a really hard time watching older shows and even documentaries that focus in on the shelter in place aspect of the pandemic.
Oh,
I was watching a show recently, and it was like, and they were it was in flashbacks, but they were, it was masking, and people were freaking out and using, like, at the beginning when they didn't know whether or not they should wash bags and things of that nature. And it was too much. And I found myself, turning it off. And at the time I didn't think much of it, but when I went back to it, before I went back to it, because I eventually went back to it, I realized, yeah, because I don't want to see this. This is trauma. This is traumatic. This takes me right back to this really terrifying time. And so I think one of the ways I deal with discomfort is by not dealing with it. Shut that shit off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, I appreciate that. For folks listening, how do you deal with daily discomforts?
Is it daily discomfort or just discomfort? I thought it was.
I think our think was daily discomforts, right? Yeah, it was daily discomforts. I sure go ahead.
They're all discomforts. I mean, it's like they pop up daily, but they're discomforts.
Yeah, dealing with discomfort. How do you deal with discomforts? So I shared about this at a meeting yesterday, that one of the things that I feel like I've had to learn in recovery, and maybe now more so than ever, is that just because I get time, just because I work a program, doesn't mean that I'm not going to be uncomfortable. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to deal with daily stressors. In a lot of ways, it doesn't mean that I'm not an alcoholic or an addict. And so for me, one of the things that's helpful that I hear a lot of is like, people talk about like the noise in their brain, and how like their brain is telling them things that aren't useful. And so, especially when I'm stressed out, that's been happening recently, where I wake up and the noise feels really loud. And the best that I can do in those situations, maybe not the best, but what I know to work for me is, I go to prayer when I remember, because sometimes I don't remember that that's an option.
Absolutely.
Um, luckily, I've had many experiences, and I've tried so many different things that if I forget about prayer, I still remember other things. Like, why don't I reach out to my sponsor? Or maybe I'm going to reach out to a friend. I get in trouble though when I start to think and like I just keep it in my head, So my sponsor always says, it's better to speak it out than to think it in.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something I've had to do recently. And so, and I think I've shared about this before. One of the things that I love that people with time do, I love hearing people with time at meetings say, I'm having a hard time.
Yeah.
That to me is so grounding, right? Because it helps me kind of push aside this thought that like, oh, like I'm doing something wrong because I'm uncomfortable.
Yeah. I feel like sometimes it is the beginning of healing for me. A lot of times is just speaking it, speaking it and not holding on to it. It's like just calling it what it is. And we were talking about it. It's like the book over there, Living Clean, is like, it almost seems like every time I meet with my sponsor usually on Tuesdays. And so we were talking about this idea of, bringing your stuff to whatever meeting with sponsors, and allowing other people to be kind of a part of that process. But when I open my mouth, that's the beginning. And then of course I take it wherever I can. I take my problems on the road and work through them. But I don't know.
Were you done?
Yeah.
Okay. I want to go back to something I was saying earlier, because it's actually something that I've been hearing a lot around me. And so remember how I was talking about how like, oh, I've gained weight and I feel my shirt rising. And one of the things that I've been hearing a lot around me are people talk about like body image issues. Obviously this isn't the body image
I'm
episode.
sorry, but the picture, look at your image on this.
I know
that is not very flattering. You look like one of those cats. You look like one of those cats sitting back eating a lasagna.
I know.
And you're talking about
I know. I'm that tired where I'm like sitting. It's not very flattering. But who gives a fuck?
No, exactly.
But
we don't care.
We don't care. But what I wanted to say is I've been here everywhere I go, especially in spaces around here, or I should say the spaces that I've been in, and I've been around here. So it's like I hear a lot of people talking about like they're trying to lose weight, or I'm going to the gym, or I'm not going to the gym, or like just a lot of like body image stuff. And for me, that feels insanely personal. And as someone who like I don't have to stand in front of a mirror, but like I do stand in front of a mirror to like brush my teeth or to shower. And that's like one of the noises in my head daily sometimes, which is like I like attack my body, or I attack my image. And it's not always like that, but that can sometimes feel like it's a daily discomfort that I'm dealing with, which is like, at what point do I get to feel good about myself is sometimes like part of the narrative, right? And what I've learned in my experience is that like being okay with myself is not something that I need to, or rather, it's not like being okay with myself isn't something that like I get to necessarily. Like, it's not like, oh, well, when I lose this amount of weight, or when I look like this, or I have this job, or whatever, but that's like never the goal, because that's a fool's errand, right? Like that's not something that works, because there's always something. And so I think that's like something that I'm learning to, or something that I'm coming back to regularly, is this idea that like I'm okay as I am now, regardless of like what's going on in my head or what I look like, etc.
Exactly. With that, I've been practicing. Like, I keep telling myself, okay, so do I want to just complain about that? Like, I had been, or do I want to acknowledge what's really going on? Because I'm not willing to go to eat differently, and I'm not willing to go to the gym, I've decided I better make peace with what I've got going here. Something, and I'm not sure if this is on topic, but we're definitely going to talk about what we want to.
Yeah.
I find being being one of those people who participated in complaining about my weight and this and that or whatever, it's really kind of, it borders on self-centered. And I used to like to change it to self-focused, but self-centered, because I don't know if you've ever been caught yourself complaining to somebody about your weight or this or that or whatever, and realizing that you're completely out of touch because the person that you're complaining to probably has different challenges. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Oh, of
Where all of
course.
a
Yeah.
sudden it's like, I'm complaining about this, that, and whatever. Like, perfect example. Okay, almost had to wait. I was complaining about my limbs hurting to an amputee. And then I stopped and I thought, what the fuck, man? Are you that, like, and thank God this individual was like really kind of understanding and realizing that I was a complete mess in that part, but not thinking about, this is why, folks, a trusted person, a trusted, like, closed mouth person that you can talk to, or your sponsor or your therapist or whatever, take it all there. That way you don't run into these times when you are just a complete freaking asshole, you know?
That's interesting because it makes me think, because what it sounds like to me is like, when people say, well, it could be worse. And I don't know if that's what you're saying. It sounds to me like maybe like this is an audience thing. Like, who am I bringing my stuff to? And is it insensitive, for example, to talk about your limbs hurting to someone who doesn't have that problem?
Exactly.
Because perhaps in some perspectives they have it worse. I don't know. This reminds me of a talk I heard like years ago by Ram Dass, and somebody had asked Ram Dass. He's a spiritual teacher. What was Ram Dass? Someone said, my son is a paraplegic, and I want to protect him from the things that people say to him or people staring at him and all this other stuff. And Ram Dass said, any parent would want to do those things, but this is part of his life's curriculum, right? And I guess what I take from that is that just because it could, quote unquote, be worse, it doesn't mean that like your concerns or the things that come up for you aren't significant.
Yes.
Or, you know what I mean? It has its place, I think maybe for me, it's, I get into trouble when I like, just like the comparing, whether it's anything, right? Like whether I'm comparing my body or my ideas, or, a person's right to complain. Yeah. Wow. This got kind of heavy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, but because I think that everybody, like when you're talking about weight and whatever, I think we all have our issues. Like, it blew me away to know that folks, even ones who I think in my mind's eye are like healthy, perfect, whatever, that they have their struggles. And in knowing that, it was like, oh, okay, it's not that I want other people to suffer, but it's like, it put my mind at ease knowing that, I'm not so terribly unique in this, that I'm not the only one who is going through whatever I'm going through. And it allows me to have a little more compassion, especially when like the thing that I know, like, and I'm going to connect the two, like when the hookup culture.
Okay.
When a guy is not interested in me because of whatever, and I can make up things in my mind, and a lot of times say it's because I'm not muscular or whatever, and I'm all thinking, I like to pull back and think, you know what, they did the work, and they get to want what they want. And especially if they don't need to constantly like say it, because I think that's the privilege when you're right. I don't want this sort of, but this is what I'm into. This is what I like. They did the work. So
that's interesting. I have a different take on it. Do you want to hear it?
I do.
I think that because what you're talking about is, I think, so at least what I hear and what you're saying is this person looks this sort of way so they can choose to have whatever partners they want, or they get to choose the people that they want to be with.
I think we all can. I think
right. That's where I was going to go, is that we all get to do that.
We all get to do that. And I think that what I'm saying, or what I do, is this little exercise so that I don't feel like I say these things. It's kind of like your little mantras or what I say, whatever. They're not into me because I'm not desirable. They're just not into me, for whatever reason. And because when I'm realistic about those things, it's like, and I don't lose any sleep over this. Like that's the one thing, especially with hookup culture, because I know what it is. I know exactly what it is. It's like half the time there's no rhyme or reason why people do stuff, and a lot of times it's because you're trying to compensate or fill a void.
Yeah. So that's where I was gonna go with that, is that this is such an interesting topic, because I think when we're talking about these things, and I will also connect it to, and I think this is part of it, right? Okay, whatever. All paths lead us to where we're going.
Discomfort. It's not that we're talking about dealing with discomfort. The conversation is not always comfortable.
Yeah, I'm like, maybe what is going on right now? Yeah. I feel like I have to shake this off in my sweater. So when I think about, so many things inform what we find attractive. Mm-hmm. It is largely social. There are very few. Actually, I gave a talk on this a couple years ago. There are very few things that are like universally beautiful. Very few things, because so much of that is culturally informed.
My money. Well, cash.
Very few things are universal when it comes to like physical attractiveness. And so there's so many different things that inform that. So when someone doesn't find another person attractive, there's a lot going into that, and none of it has anything to do with you. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
I feel like the easiest way of kind of like positioning, like thinking about this, is like, you think about, like, we are often attracted to what we see the most of, right? And so any person, yeah, I'll explain.
Okay.
Yeah. So for example, here are a couple good examples. There was a time, like during, I think it was the Renaissance, when having pale skin, looking old, were things that were attractive, right? Women with high foreheads. So what they would do is they would pluck the hairs so that their forehead looked fucking huge, because it was a sign of beauty. And they would deliberately make themselves look old, and they would, right? And so that was because wisdom was like the thing that was lauded, right? There was a time, for example, when like the overweight man was attractive, right? And that was because there were a lot of implications there, and it also that also goes far back too. It was a sign of wealth, it was a sign of leisure. And if you kind of keep going on, like, these things that we've called beautiful for a really long time, those things have shifted. So the hard body, for example, was not considered very attractive. It was considered a sign of poverty, because you had to work hard, right? And so now if you keep moving that on, so now like a hard body is also, now it's considered like it's attractive now, and it's what we are like exposed to. Similarly, like you see this with like the images that you see on TV. You can literally make any type of person or any type of look attractive if you expose people to it enough, and if you infuse it with like the political thing. So all of that is to say that like none of that shit is personal.
Yeah.
Of course, it's a much more nuanced conversation, but that's kind of like what I'm thinking of. And so when we think about, I see that comment, and so when we're thinking about things that make us uncomfortable daily or otherwise, I think part of what makes things uncomfortable for me is when I only have one way of looking at something, right? Instead of opening up. Let's see that comment. Mo Martinez says, mindfulness helps to get back to comfort sometimes. Practicing mindful meditation of presence, as in, at this moment, what do I hear, see, feel, smell, taste, helps to get to this moment right now and not dwell on a past or future event, which tends to be where some discomfort can exacerbate. Thank you, Mo.
Thank you, Mo.
I love that.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I feel like I need to read it again.
Uh-huh.
That's great. Absolutely. I want to add to that. I think so. I had this professor once say that God's biggest sin against humanity was that he gave us eyes, because so many of our prejudices or biases are centered in like what we can see. Mm-hmm. And what that makes me think of is what it feels like to be close to people. So if you think about like love or friendship or just intense connection. There is this way that, at least in my experience, you're so ever present with them. You know what I mean? And you almost forget they're in a body, because there's like a connection there, and it's in the immediate, and it's not in the future, and it's not in the past, but it's right there. And that's what that reminds me of, when there is discomfort, it's like, it's because you're somewhere other than, I don't know. Well, let me rephrase that. It's not because of anything. Like, when I'm uncomfortable, it's normally because I'm somewhere other than in the present.
So what I will say, that the program has taught me this way to deal with discomfort that I avoided before through drinking and using. When discomfort comes up, I get to sit with it, not run from it, just sit with it. And the more times that I sit through it and make it through, because in the beginning I would be uncomfortable. I wouldn't feel right, and I couldn't see past it to see that it was going to pass, at some point. So it was always tough. And of course, that's why I would always run to a drink or a drug, because I didn't like the feeling. But the more that especially when I no longer had that option of drinking or using, and I had to sit through it. And, sometimes it would take a long time to pass, and sometimes it would just pass within the hour, or sitting through a meeting. But the more times like you experience coming out of it, you gain that muscle memory or whatever. And then, and I think that this is what's helped me to kind of change how I view discomfort. Like, in some ways, it's a gift. It informs us. It tells us, it helps me to know the things that I want and need to work on. Like, we have this 5th step practice. And for those who don't know, the 5th step is kind of, just in layman's terms, just telling somebody what's going on. And then in turn, telling somebody, you tell your higher power. But when I sit with my sponsor, or even like a therapist, and it's like, I forgot what I was saying, but it's like a lot of it was just like
discomfort,
opening my mouth and talking about it. And that's where the mindfulness comes in. It's like, I love that it's almost, Mo talked about the mindfulness and then the mindfulness meditation. And I feel like there was something you could do and something you can do to get to the something you can do. Because it takes a while, because while you're reading that, I was thinking, like, last week we were talking about like being in the present takes so much energy.
Oh yeah.
But having an exercise like mindfulness meditation, and also an understanding that it's just not going to happen overnight, and something that if you keep at it, then you get better at it.
Yeah, I've talked about this before too, where one of the tenets of Buddhism is that life is suffering. Like that's it. Well, the human condition is one where we suffer, period. And I think that's one of the things that is hard to accept. This idea, for example, that we should be happy, that's a relatively new idea. That was within like the last 60 or 70 years, right? That this idea that that is the aim of life, is to be happy, because it's a luxury, right? So what I was reminded of while you were talking, and also from Mo's comment, so Pema Children, she's a Buddhist nun, and she tells this story about how, for many of us, when we think of things, we will often go running to the thought, and we'll toil with the thought. We'll like fight with the thought, thinking that it's going to make us feel better, when in fact we're making it worse. And the analogy she draws is, she says, we're kind of like babies with scabies. Like if we have,
babies with
scabies, and like if we scratch it, we we feel like it's going to make us feel better, but actually it just makes it worse, because then you're just spreading it, right? Mm-hmm. And so in meditation with thoughts, right, rather than going and running to every thought, the teaching is to bring yourself to the present. And the way you bring yourself to the present is by, there's so many different ways. If you want to get into mindfulness, just Google mindfulness practices, Google mindfulness meditations. But one of the things that I do, this is also one of her teachings, is she talks, it's called the charnel ground practice. Have you ever heard of that charnel ground practice? So basically there was this time when it's also Buddhist. There were these monks, and they lived up like high in the hill, and the ground was frozen. This is not a story. This is like this is like the way that the meditation came from. So they had this thing called charnel ground practice. And what they did, because the ground was so cold, it was frozen, they couldn't bury bodies. So what they would have to do is they would have to cut up the body parts and they would have to scatter them about the charnel ground. And so they had these grounds that they were just filled with these bodies. And so the monks would go in and they would walk through it. And what they would have to watch is the meditation or the practice is to monitor all the feelings and thoughts that would come up, and just to monitor them, right? Rather than kind of like give into them. And so, she teaches that similarly, we can do that with our hurt feelings, or with like, our ruminations, is that we can observe them and just not we don't have to run away with them. And that takes a lot of practice. That shit does not happen overnight. It doesn't mean that you stop feeling the feeling. But I love what you said. Like the last thing you said is that you build the muscle memory. I do think it gets easier.
It does. And I think that's wisdom.
The wisdom is I think so. I think, gosh, the other thing is that at some point for me is like I've gotten tired of fighting,
Mm-hmm.
It's like the fighting just makes it worse sometimes, like fighting the thoughts or fighting the feelings, or, yesterday I was sharing, I thought about you. I shared at a meeting last night, and I thought about you because I was talking about how, in the past, I would hear someone share and it was always the same share over and over again. And it would make me very mad, or like not mad, but frustrated.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, like, who gives a fuck? You know what I mean? Like, who cares? Who cares if that person is talking about the same thing over and over again? Number one, it's none of my business. Number two, like, that is someone that is like, they're doing what they need to do. Mm-hmm. But this idea, like, how self-centered and how selfish of me to be like,
my sponsor always says everybody gets the 3 minutes.
The same 3 minutes. Yeah.
Now, if you go over the 3 minutes, I have every right to complain.
I have the green light to complain after those 3 minutes.
I shared at a meeting last night too. It must have been up in Diamond Heights. It's like it must have been
I was at the Eureka one.
Oh, nice.
The 6 o'clock.
Good show.
Yeah, it was a nice meeting.
And interestingly enough, like I find, and I don't know if you find this, but with my shares, and for those of us in 12-step recovery, you stay around long enough, you'll be sharing a bunch, and it's a gift. I was telling Esponsi, it's a great way. He's new. He's still kind of new around the city. He's been in the program for a bit. That people get to know you. They're going to connect with you. But I used to, depending on how long I'd been in the program, I used to first, I would think, oh no, I'm just going to go straight to the recovery. I'm not going to talk about what it was like or whatever. And then I got to a place and I realized, because the meetings the program is me sitting across from someone, but the meetings are so we can meet people. So we can meet people who need the program, and they can't always relate to someone who has more time. But the danger sometimes in me talking about what it was like is I romanticize it, especially if you get a few laughs, because it's like I'm always trying to like entertain, and then I stay in too long, and then all I have is about 3 or so minutes to get sober. You know what I do at the beginning of my share?
What?
I tell them, you know what? Spoiler alert, I got sober. I don't know what's going to happen, because I usually try not to think about what I'm going to say, because I think that when you spend, like, if I know I'm sharing a couple weeks from now, mm-hmm. and I'm spending all this time thinking about what I'm going to say, it's never going to go the way I want it to. Like, when I don't think about it and I just show up and I just share it, I feel like that's when I'm closest to my higher power.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, when I with the gala, I remember like the day before I had met with Brandon, and I had these like ideas of things that I was going to say. And as I was talking to Brandon wasn't reacting in the way that I wanted him to react. And I was like, oh, this is horrible. But go ahead.
Key points. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with me thinking, like, the key points, like when I'm performing in drag, there are certain things that I want to do. And if I think about those, but trying to think about like the beginning, middle, and end or whatever, it just is no good. The only time that's ever worked is when I've been fortunate enough to have a longer share. Like when you, one of the meetings I shared at this year, it was a 30-minute share as opposed to like a 20-minute share. And 10 minutes doesn't seem like a lot, but it is a lot when you want to add some fluff,
Sure.
Like, yeah, when you want to add fluff.
Yeah. What you're reminding me of is so there are different so I studied rhetoric in undergrad, and there are these different techniques or different ideas about what yields like the best speech or like the best public discourse, like public presentations. And there's one school of thought says that you should have like bullet points, and those bullet points will kind of like give you the momentum, and then then you have what you need. That feels more organic.
Absolutely.
And then you have other people that say like, no, you have to kind of like write it down and edit and move it around and do all of that stuff.
Yeah, I know. It's like the danger with me and writing everything down is that I finish it and then I got 10 more minutes left. I think what's nice when we're on this, I think what's nice is I know my story better than anybody else knows my story. I just get to decide what aspects of it. It's kind of like when you're preparing your resume or your cover letter. I'm gonna let you know which aspects I think need to be highlighted so that I can get in your door.
God, you just I just like kind of like twitched a little bit because I just finished writing all those damn cover letters.
Exactly.
But going back to, we're not going back. We're on this. We're on this journey together.
Yeah, exactly.
You were talking about if you get a laugh,
Mm-hmm.
and I was talking yesterday at this meeting about how praise was very kind of like deadly for me in the beginning. Not deadly. Those words are really intense. Let me start over. So in early recovery, I would go to a meeting, and I remember after I like shared at this meeting, I noticed that people were, Brandon just yawned so big. Brandon is so bored right now. Brandon is like, y'all are just so boring. But so I went to this meeting, and I was maybe like on week 2 or week 3 or something like that. Mm-hmm. And after the meeting, someone came up to me and they said, Anthony, that was a great share. And I thought, oh, these people need to hear me. And I thought I'm inspiring people. You know what I mean? And yes, so I remember the next meeting I went to, there was like more vibrato in my voice. And but I didn't get the same reaction. And I thought, oh my God, I need to work on my act.
I need dancers.
I'm failing these people. They need my inspiration.
Oh my God. Hey, so back to daily discomfort. Okay. So a couple weeks ago on a Sunday night, I work, and it was a busy night, and for whatever reason, there was a shift in my energy and my personality, and I just was not feeling it. I was just uncomfortable. And usually I'm able to kind of go home or go do something else or find a way to not be around people because I don't want to give them that energy. But I had a commitment that night. So I was at the meeting, and at the beginning of the meeting, usually what happens is I'm there long enough, I'll break out of it, but I wasn't breaking out of it. Maybe there was a part of me that was holding on to it, because sometimes I'm feeling this way. It's like, it's mine. I'm gonna hold on to this. It wasn't happening. And then I found out we do the pom-poms at the meeting, and either the pom-poms were tossed out.
I remember this, yeah.
Or the pom-poms were tossed out, or whatever the situation was, they were no longer there. And it added to what I was feeling, and I was just in a crappy mood. I was looking around at all the people that I care about, and there was nobody. The joy wasn't breaking through what I was experiencing. So I went and apologized to the speaker who I had heard before, and I went home, and I relaxed, and I did some of my favorite things, like I ate something, crawled into bed, and fell into like a TikTok hole and whatever, and it was fine. And I feel like that was my my self-care. And that I needed that. Like there are times when I have to kind of detach myself from everyone. I just needed to get away from people.
What you're reminding me of, I don't know if you're reminding me of this, but it comes to mind, is one of the things that sometimes is difficult for me is in maybe trying to figure out, like, are these feelings that I create space for, or are these feelings that I need to do away with, right? Like, do I hold this, or do I like try to find another way of thinking, right? And because there is a part of me that thinks, well, no, like if I'm having this feeling, I'm going to do myself a disservice, or I'm going to cause myself unnecessary harm if I'm like working so hard to get myself to not feel this thing, right? Because like with grief, for example, like we have to grieve.
Yeah.
And so you're not doing yourself a favor if you try to like skip over the grieving and get right to acceptance.
Yeah.
And so sometimes, that's really difficult for me, which is like, okay, when do I hold or make room for this? And when do I try to like let things go? But I think, like I was saying earlier, like it isn't just one or the other. I think that on my best days, which I've also said before, on my best days, I'm able to pull the lens back and there's space for all of it. It isn't one or the other. It's like it just is, it's not right or wrong. It's what's happening right there and then. And so sometimes the best that I can do is like not fight with whatever it is.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to make you go and I'm not trying to make you stay. I'm not trying to fight. So Louis, I think we're at that time.
Yeah, we've made it.
We have. And
the Castro Country Club is a safe and sober community center for all people and a refuge for the LGBTQ recovery community.
We provide programs and services that help people change their lives by supporting personal growth.
Our vision is to reduce the suffering of addiction by connecting people to community, opportunity, and support.
You can find more information, including all the ways to contact us, at www.castrocountryclub.org/podcast.
Yes, and tune in every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time when we go live on our Castro Country Club Facebook and YouTube channels.
Find us wherever you listen to podcasts.